Well, first of all, thanks for letting me do it this way. I was supposed to be with you, as you know, and I had the trip. I was supposed to go to Washington to talk to the guys at Theological College and then make my way to St. Louis. To make a long story short, with COVID, flights got canceled, and suddenly the trip just became more or less impossible. So really grateful to all of you, to everyone at Kenrick for allowing me to appear, this way. It makes it just a lot easier. I'm here in my little Word on Fire studio in Santa Barbara, so glad to be with you. And let me just say a couple things as I get going about intellectual formation in relation to parish priesthood. Because when I was coming of age, years ago, people kind of drove a wedge between those two things, as though there's an academic reality and then there's the pastoral reality. And I've always been uneasy with that. And all my years in both the pastoral and academic arenas have convinced me of how really misguided that disjunction is. See, I think as students of theology, you're preparing to be, first of all, mystagogues, people who lead others into the mystery of God. So priests serve in some very concrete ways. That's true. We care for people's bodily needs and psychological needs and so on. But I think ultimately our purpose is to guide people into the mystery of God, especially in a culture now where increasingly people aren't talking about God. They're disaffiliating from the church. They're disaffiliating from religious belief. Who will speak of the mystery of God? Well, it seems to me an extraordinarily important task of the priest. What do you use in that mystagogic art but the doctrines of the church? They're not hoops to jump through on your way to priesthood. They're essential to your mystagogic work. Think of the doctrines of the church as signposts in the itinerarium mentis in Deum, right, to use Bonaventure's term. In the soul's journey into God, well, that's what you guide people with, are the doctrines of the church. So especially now in this hyper-secularized time, I think to be equipped to speak of the mystery of God in a coherent, compelling, intellectually satisfying way is pastorally indispensable. Second consideration, priests, it seems to me, are doctors of the soul. They do what's classically called cura animarum, right? The care of souls. And again, there are doctors galore in our culture that doctor the body in 1,000 different ways and doctor the mind and the psyche and so on. But who speaks for the soul? And in our increasingly secularized time, when people even doubt the existence or the importance of what we call soul, who speaks of that dimension of the person? And soul just names, it seems to me, the deepest or most englobing reality of the human person. Aquinas says the soul is in the body, but not as contained by it, but rather as containing it. Well, who speaks for the soul? That's the job of the curate, to use that old term, curate from cura, right, from care of the soul. Well, that's theology. Theology is soul doctoring language. Prior to the modern period, when a lot of our great minds went into the physical sciences, the greatest minds in the West went into soul doctoring, it seems to me. Look at all the volumes of theology on the shelves of our theological libraries. Those are soul doctoring texts. What's the soul? What does the soul want? What goes wrong with the soul? What are diseases of the soul? How is the soul treated? That's theological language. That's spiritual language. And trust me, guys, when I tell you, in your pastoral work, yes, you use, all the insights from psychology, et cetera. Nothing against that. Gratias opponent naturam. But what you're really ultimately using is the soul doctoring language of our great theological tradition. So that's the stuff that goes in your black bag, as a doctor of souls. And just a third consideration. A couple years ago, I did a commentary on 2 Samuel for that Brazos series of biblical commentaries. And it got me into the David stories, of course, in a really deep way. And what strikes you about David, the paradigmatic king of Israel, guides his people and shepherds his people in all sorts of ways, military, political, and otherwise. But one of the chief ways that David leads is by being the sweet singer of the house of Israel. That's that lovely translation in the King James Version. the sweet singer of the house of Israel. David's associated with song. So he comes to soothe, remember, the troubled mind of Saul. He gives the great speech in front of Goliath and then the Israelite troops. He gives the great elegy on Mount Gilboa for Saul and Jonathan. He's associated, of course, with the Psalms. He leads by articulating a beautiful and compelling vision. I mean, there he's like, it seems to me, Lincoln, who'd be probably of anyone in American history, the sweet singer of the House of America, maybe Jefferson too, but someone that used language to articulate the vision of the country. Or Churchill in 1940, was the sweet singer of the House of England and roused his people to defend their island. That's not just decorative. That was essential to their leadership. Well, it seems to me priests are the sweet singers of the new Israel, which is the church. Part of your task is to articulate a vision of life that's beautiful and rich, compelling, intellectually satisfying, that you use language in this elevated way so as to lead your people. Well, that's the language of theology. So it's not just some technical jargon for specialists to be interested in, but it gives you the poetic wherewithal to lead your people as sweet singers. So mystagogues, soul doctors, articulators of the great vision, that's what your theological education and formation is meant to do. So even I'll give you this lecture later on this afternoon, in the evening, your time, talking about God in a sort of theologically sophisticated way. Okay, that's of pastoral significance, it seems to me. Don't isolate these different aspects of your formation. That was a danger in my time, I think, when I was a young guy. There was a danger of kind of isolating and setting even over and against each other the various dimensions of your formation. Don't do that, but rather bring all the theology into your pastoral work. Okay, end of Fervorino. Just wanted to share that with you. And then more than open to your questions, concerns, observations. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Bishop. My name is Deacon Ryan Truss. I'm a seminarian here for the Archdiocese of St. Louis. And I have a question about that connection between the pastoral and the intellectual. And it has to do with a third dimension of formation, which is the spiritual part of formation, which the PBS speaks of as sort of the integrating aspect of formation. I'm wondering how do you recommend praying with the things that we study in class, and in such a way as to avoid the danger of, making the prayer simply an extension of the study, but a way to make that relational and get imbued with the beautiful things that we learn in class.
Yeah, good. We've been alluding to the four pillars, from Pastoris Dabo Vobis, which have been so basic in the way we've been thinking about seminary formation the last, 30 years. And I think you can make a good case that any one of the four is foundational. So people say, no, it's human formation is foundational because gratias opponent naturam, and unless you have all the great interpersonal gifts and you can relate to people and have a sense of humor and you're psychologically developed and so on, sure, you could say that's foundational. I just gave you a speech emphasizing how foundational the academic formation is. Many have argued that actually the pastoral pillar is the final cause of the four. Like it's that toward which the other ones are directed, especially given the work you're preparing to do. And then by the same token, as you're suggesting, I think the spiritual pillar could also be seen as foundational or organizational of the other three. Fair enough. I think that's okay. They're all mutually implicative in a fundamental way. But I would say this. I used to tell my students at Mundelein, if you don't want to walk from my class in Doctrine of God to the chapel to pray, there's something wrong with the way I'm teaching or the way you're learning. My point was that should be the most natural thing in the world, that you would go from a study of the Trinity, a study of the divine simplicity, a study of the attributes of God. you'd go right from that to the chapel, you know? You'd go from the chapel back to the classroom with a deepened interest and focus. So yeah, there's a failure somewhere if you don't feel that impulse. Of course you pray your way through theology. Of course you think your way through prayer. You know, they're mutually implicative because we're one. You know, in our anthropology, we're one. We can identify certain dimensions of the self, but finally we're one. So I think if you're not praying your theology, something's wrong with the way it's being taught or the way it's being learned. And then I'd say this too. I think your prayer is the most important thing as you go into your parish ministry. Your pastoral involvement will tend to take care of itself, by which I mean simply, you'll be drawn into it very naturally, especially as you arrive in the parish as Father Young Priest and everybody wants you to be part of their group and they're all inviting you, and terrific. You'll be drawn into that, I think, very readily. Where priests tend to go wrong is they stop praying, or they pray in a very superficial way. Because you're on for that. I mean, the parish isn't going to draw you naturally into your holy hour. You got to make that resolution. I've always been struck, I'm sure you've heard this, Monsignor Rossetti, right? Stephen Rossetti used to run the St. Luke's Institute. He said, in his experience of dealing with dysfunctional priests having trouble, they're all unique in their own way. They've all got a unique type of problem. But he said the one thing, unambiguously, that every one of them has in common is they stop praying. And from the moment I heard that, it struck me as dead right. I just thought intuitively that's right. And I've never forgotten it. The one thing all priests who have trouble and dysfunction have in common is they stop praying. So you have to consciously and concretely enter into the life of prayer, or you're not going to make it as a priest, as a parish priest. What I tell the guys here now in LA, when I talk to the deacons about to be ordained, you know, what advice would you give? And I say, your holy hour. I mean, in a way, the holy hour, and then the rest will take care of itself. The holy hour is the matrix from which the rest of your priesthood will come. So I think that's just indispensably important. Please, go ahead.
Hey, Bishop Barron. So I'm hearing from multiple different sources, the kind of the church being in either a Christendom age or being in a more apostolic age. That is, Christendom is that our society is kind of animated by Christian principles versus one that's not. And so my question is, within that, one, if you agree with that, and two, is would that, if you're, so if you were a seminarian and you're trying to form yourself to maybe a more apostolic age, how would that change your attitude within the seminary? Because when I first heard this distinction between the church and the Christendom age versus apostolic, it kind of, I was a little confused because my vision of the seminary was we want to make a little bubble of Christendom, one that's a really highly intense Catholic culture, and then it overflows out from that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I'm having a really hard time understanding with the mic you guys have there. So I wasn't getting a lot of the first. You talked about apostolic and Christendom, and I wonder, it's just really hard to get the questions with that mic.
Maybe they can talk directly into the camera rather than...
I wonder, yeah.
Directly into the computer rather than directly into the...
Is there a way to maybe talk directly into the computer might be easier than the microphone, because it's like real distorted. See if that works better.
Okay, can you hear me now,
Yes,
Bishop
much better. Go ahead. Much better.
All righty. So I keep hearing this distinction between the church in a Christendom age versus an apostolic age, one that's animated in a fundamental way by the gospel, and one that's not. And so I keep hearing that we're being formed to live and to exercise our priesthood in an apostolic age. So with that in mind, would that change, if you were in a seminarian today, would that change your approach to the seminary? Something that's in my mind is, because my idea of a seminary when I first come here is that we want to make a bubble of Christendom, one where we can make a very Catholic culture in all its dimensions with all the 4 dimensions of formation. And then from that, then we overflow out. But could you speak into that a little bit? Thank you.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you, by the way. That was so much easier to understand that way. Good. You're raising a number of things. Are we dealing with a culture today more like the paganism the church met in the early days, or more like Christendom? I'd say more like paganism. The mark of our time, as I mentioned, is the disaffiliation, the rise of the nuns, the suspension of belief on the part of many people, the fading away of convictions that were enduring even for a time when people had stopped going to church, but sort of like going on fumes. But now increasingly, even that is fading away. So I think we are facing a culture in some ways more like the classical church. Now, because I mean, Christendom, that's clearly not obtaining any place, certainly not in our culture, where there's a basic set of Christian assumptions and then animating the political realm in a very explicit way. I mean, that just doesn't exist now. But the church has always found a way. Go back to apostolic times, what did it do? At times hunkered down when it had to, when things got really dicey. Think of some of the finest spirits of the 4th century. They all took to the hills. You know, this is even Augustine himself, before he becomes a priest and a bishop, wants to retire into philosophical meditation. But look at Jerome, look at the young Chrysostom. You know, there was a desire to find this kind of intensely lived Christian form outside of the societal structures. But another great instinct in that time was to look for the semina verbi. So in all the church fathers, many of them anyway, you find this: what are the seeds of the word? What's available in the pagan culture that can be conducive to the gospel? And a lot of our theological tradition comes from that instinct. Go right back to Justin the Martyr, but come up to someone like Origen. I mean, Origen's assumption that he could find all kinds of semina verbi within the Greek philosophical culture. Well, without Origen, there's no Thomas Aquinas. I mean, the instinct of Origen became that of Augustine and eventually Aquinas. So in my own work, both academic and evangelical, I've tried to do that. What are the semina verbi, the seeds of the word, that are available even in what's in some ways a post-Christian culture? Okay, find them. Find them. You're being trained right now to find the semina verbi, because they're there very often, but people can't find them. They can't name them. Well, you can. So do that in your pastoral work. Do that in your evangelical work. I kind of liked your instinct about the seminary as a little bit of that place to hunker down. You know, fair enough. It's sort of the Noah's Ark image of a microcosm of God's good order is preserved during this time of chaos. Okay. I like that. I think seminaries do have that role. Your liturgical life, your intellectual life, your community life, you're intensely living the Christian thing. But with Noah's Ark in mind again, when the ark comes to rest, the life goes out, right? So that's your job. You're being trained not to be monks, but to be apostles. You're going to be sent into this culture, which is certainly not a Christendom culture. It's in many ways a post-Christian culture, but you're sent out into it. Having hunkered down for whatever it is, 4 years, 6 years, 7 years, fine. But now open the windows and doors and out you go. And then I'd say, look for the semina verbi, assimilate what you can, resist what you must. That's always been the instinct of our best church people over the centuries. So look around the culture. What's assimilable here? What can I bring in to the life of the church, and what needs to be resisted? Both and, under the rubric of the apostolic. Yeah, so good. Please come up to the computer. It's just a lot easier to understand. Hi, go ahead.
Bishop, my name is Jonathan Tolberg. I am a seminarian for Diocese of Wichita and the Third Theologian.
Good.
I have a question about the interplay between evangelization and technology. Mm-hmm. And so could you speak about that for a moment, and then about the role of a live streamed mass and how that is affecting our church? Thank you.
Yeah, so the general question, is a good one, and I've been for different reasons, drawn into that world. You know, I felt the summons kind of, I think from the Lord ultimately to do more evangelical work. And then it was Cardinal George of Chicago who sort of gave that institutional focus for me, where he really assigned me to do evangelical work. And in the early days, you know, I was radio a little bit, and then Cardinal George had me giving lectures in downtown Chicago. So I give lectures at lunchtime to business leaders and so on and so forth. And we'd gather 200 or 300 people in a nice room and serve a simple lunch, and I would give a talk, and then they go back to work. So it was it was good. I enjoyed those talks, and I hope they did too. But when I finished, I said to the Cardinal, you know, they're good, what we just did, but there's something kind of 19th century about it. It's something John Henry Newman would have done. But I said, now we have these tools available to us that are extraordinary. And Cardinal George, you know, was a bookish man of his generation and didn't really understand the new media, but he got the idea. He said, okay, I think that's true, and maybe go forth now and use the new media to evangelize. So that's where that came from. And I just think it would be derelict if we didn't use the new media at this point. Like everything else, it's corruptible. You know, I mean, everything else in human experience is corruptible, and God knows the new media can be used for terrible things, and they can bring forth the worst in people. I've seen that. Nevertheless, I think it's incumbent upon us to use this tool, listen, you know, which will enable us to find people who are not coming to our institutions anymore. There's something very naive on the part of some church people, I think, when we'll just, you know, improve our programs and we'll have a better lecture series at the parish. Or, well, that's great, but the people we are targeting aren't coming to our programs. We have to go out into their world to find them, and the social media allow us to do that. You got to be disciplined, and you have to be spiritually alert as you're doing it. But I think it would just be a crime if we didn't use this tool that was available to us. And you guys have it in your blood in a way that I don't. I mean, I came to it, you know, I love books and articles and, you know, all that business. I didn't know much about social media and all that. But you've got it in your blood. You grew up with it. It's in your fingers. And so use it creatively and with panache and with great intelligence. Something I've told my brother bishops now time and again is I think find one of your best and brightest young priests and send them to studies, but not for the sake of teaching in the seminary necessarily. Most dioceses don't have a seminary. But I said, you've all got the possibility of doing really good social media outreach. Get your best and brightest young guy, send him for a doctorate, but to do that work. Engage people. You know, believe me, when you present yourself as a religious person to the culture, saying, hey, I'm open to entertaining your questions. Trust me, they'll come forward with their questions. Well, good, but then we got to be able to meet them with intelligence, you know? I'll give you one example recently is, I don't know if you know about Reddit, this website, which is like a forum for the exchange of ideas and raising of questions. And they have a feature called AMA, which means Ask Me Anything. And it's like, I always say it like the medieval quadlibitals, you know, because it's like, hey, ask me whatever's on your mind. And so they do. And I've done it twice now. And both times it was one of the most popular Reddit AMAs of the whole year. And I say it not to toot my horn. They didn't know who I was from Adam, I'm sure, 98% of them. But I was a Catholic bishop who loves talking to atheists and seekers. That's something like that is how I presented myself. Well, I mean, they came forward in enormous numbers to engage me. My point there is you start in your parish, in your diocese, you start a social media outreach, and they'll come, you know, they'll come. So that's the answer to the first part of the question. The live stream masses, I did them now for several months at the worst of the COVID period. And then once out in California, the churches were opened again, we decided to stop doing them. I think they were fine as a stopgap. You know, I never think they're any kind of substitute. Ours were widely viewed all over the world, and I think they were beneficial. I'm glad we did it. but I was also eager to get people back to church. And frankly, I don't know what it's like in all your various dioceses, but out here we're still able in a very limited way to have people at church, and that really worries me. Will they come back in great numbers? So I don't think by any means that live stream masses are a substitute.
Thank you very much, Bishop. My name is Deacon Kevin Lennis from the Diocese of San Angelo. This is the first point of your fervorino was to bring people into the mystery of God, and you said that was indispensable. And you were touching on this just now with the social media, but have you found any really good practical ways for a parish priest, I guess other than social media since you talked about it, to reach beyond the parishioners to get those people that aren't coming to church to recognize who is God in his essence? Of course, not making it super philosophical, but to bring people into the nature of who God is. Does that make sense?
Sure. That's my lecture tonight in some ways. I'm going to be addressing myself to this fundamental problem of the lack of belief in God and what are some paths. But one thing I've done pastorally is rely on the Augustinian anthropology. Page 1 of the Confessions, the single greatest statement of Christian anthropology, right? Lord, you've made us for yourself, and therefore our heart is restless till it rests in thee. I use that almost every day, I would say, in some social media context, in a combox or a response to somebody, because I think everyone, even the most ardent atheist, recognizes the legitimacy of that. Nothing in this world satisfies the deepest longing of the heart. So the heart orders me to something which necessarily goes beyond this world. We could talk about it in terms of conscience, how there's a higher voice ordering my moral life, but see, people are so freaked out by the moral life. But the Augustinian thing is, it's more fundamental, It's this longing, this desire of my heart, which I know can't be satisfied. And trust me, they can be the crustiest, most anti-religious person, but they know that's true. Well, if that's true, you are actually in the presence of the God that we keep talking about. The God who has planted that desire in us and is waiting to fulfill it. So I think that's just a good method. And then one way to do that is look at every movie that you'll ever see, any book you'll ever read, to some degree is always haunted by the Augustinian anthropology. There's some version of, oh yeah, you're hungry for something, and whatever it was you were seeking to satisfy it didn't work. Now, watch every Billy Graham homily ever delivered. They have that basic structure always. You've been seeking happiness in A, B, C, D, and E, haven't you? And it hasn't worked, has it? I want to give you what does work. And watch every single Billy Graham sermon has that basic structure. Listen to John Paul II. You'll hear it all the time in him, the Augustinian anthropology. So I would recommend that as a good way in. It's a good mystagogic method.
Hello, Bishop.
Hi.
My name is Will Kirshen. I'm a seminarian from the Diocese of Wichita in second year pre-theology. My question regards, you often talk about the way of youth, its role in evangelization.
Yeah.
And I think, at least for me, it can maybe be easy to wrap my head around how that might apply for an artist or for a pastor who's responsible for the
Hey, how are you?
Thanks, Charlie. For the liturgy, for the music, for even the architecture in their church, but maybe less so for the average Catholic in the pews or for us as seminarians. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, what it might look like to employ that way of beauty in evangelization for the average Catholic.
Well, let's stay with you guys as seminarians preparing for the priesthood, because everything you said there is right, it seems to me. The liturgy, art at the Mass, music, architecture. Well, every one of you is going to be a pastor, please God, someday. And as pastor, That's your job, is to coordinate all the charisms in your parish. So maybe you're not an artist yourself, you're not an architect yourself, you're not a musician yourself. So what? But your job is to coordinate all of those charisms for the sake of the mission. And so everything you said, that's it. That's how you use the via pulchritudinis, right? The way of beauty. As you suggest, if you are an artist, architect, and musician, great, then you do your own work, but you're a coordinator of it. I'll give you an example. When I was rector at Mundelein, we redid we used to call it the house chapel, which was a very bland 1970s, very beige sort of chapel. And so when I became rector, I decided John Paul II had just been canonized. I said, let's make it the John Paul II chapel. And we really did it up right. We had, I think it was 19 just empty windows. That was the aesthetic of the time, empty windows. So I said, let's fill them with stained glass of the great saints and blesseds of John Paul II. Let's create a beautiful icon of John Paul II. Let's have Our Lady Guadalupe. Let's have beautiful crucifix and statues in the front. Let's have an altar that's really beautifully crafted. Well, I mean, I can't do any of those things. I don't know how to do any of those things. But as rector, my job was to coordinate this whole effort. And so we got very fine stained glass artists and very fine painters and iconographers and woodworkers and so on. And I coordinated them to produce the John Paul II chapel. Well, please God, a lot of you will have the chance to build a church, to redecorate, redesign a church. Well, bring the beautiful forward. We did mute it in the years after the council, and it was a dumb mistake. I mean, it was not at all in the Vatican II documents. On the contrary. But yet we did kind of mute the beautiful. We construed church buildings as just tents where the holy people gather for a short time. And no, that's not at all of the great Catholic tradition. So I would encourage all of you, and that's why, maybe the pre-theos especially, study the arts. Maybe you're not going to be a great painter yourself, but you can study the artistic tradition, learn to love it. Study the great musical heritage of the church. Study architecture. And the general idea here, I've talked about many times, is of the three great transcendentals, the beautiful is the least threatening to people today, I think. Most people are shaped by a postmodern culture. There's no objective truth, no objective moral value. It's all a power play. Don't tell me what to do. Okay, granted that, then is it best to use the third transcendental of the beautiful, which is less threatening? Just look at this. Let me just show you something. How often in the great tradition you'll see these stories again and again, that people are converted by a church building. They're converted by a picture. Do you guys know Christopher Hitchens, right? The most famous of the new atheists who died now several years ago. But his brother, Peter Hitchens, is an ardent Christian. So they're very interesting. And they debated a few times, actually, the two brothers. But read Peter Hitchens' autobiographical work. He talks about, I believe it was Roger van der Weyden, there was a painting of the Last Judgment. And he wandered into this cathedral in Holland, I think it was, or France somewhere. And he sees this picture by Roger van der Weyden from the 15th century. And at the time, he was basically a non-believer. But that picture changed him, and it started him on the path toward belief. Think of the young Cardinal Lustiger. As his parents are killed in the Shoah, he's living with a Christian family in France, but has no Christian faith at all, till he wandered into a cathedral. And that's what started the process of conversion. So long before he got to anything like arguments or, rational discussions, he was converted by a building, by a church building. I take that very seriously. And I think you should too, as future leaders of the church.
Thank you, Bishop Barron.
Please go ahead.
Ryan Marderay from the Diocese of Bismarck, Theology 2. So my question is, as you look at some of the saints of technology who have been very creative, Venerable Fulton Sheen, Mother Angelica, St. Maximilian Kolbe, it seemed they lived lives of deep study and deep prayer. And it seems one of the temptations for a young priest could be to focus on the means and the creativity of how to promote these things, and maybe to become dissipated and to abandon the life of deep study. And so how would you recommend, and how have you seen in your own life, to continue this habit of study throughout the priesthood?
Good. I like the word habit there. I used to talk to the Mundelein guys about having the habitus of theology. I tell the young deacons here in LA, prayer and study. When I walk into a priest's house and I don't see any books, that's always a bad sign. When I was rector, I would visit the students in their room sometimes, and I'd always look at their bookshelves. And they came to know this, so they kind of got them prepped for me, I think, when I came. But I would go over and I would just, what are you reading? And, what do you think about this book? And, it's indispensably important that you pray, yes, and Fulton Sheen, who gave us, I think, the renewed interest in the holy hour. That's one of his great gifts to the church. But that was the key to his spirituality. John Paul II said the same thing. Reginald of Properno, Thomas Aquinas' Socius, said the same thing about Aquinas. That he got his far more wisdom from his hours of prayer than from his study. So that's basic in the life of the church. If you're doing evangelization or teaching through social media, a fortiori, you should be a person of prayer. But also, I like your stress on study. You're not reading. You'll start repeating yourself. You'll start telling the same boring stories. Trust me, your experience isn't that compelling. When I was going through the seminary, tell them about your experience. Well, okay, I get it. We're meant to, bring this message to bear in people's lives, but my experience is not that thrilling. What's thrilling is the gospel. What's thrilling is the Bible. What's thrilling is this world opened up by revelation. Learn that world. You read the sermons that we've preserved over the centuries, from Origen through Fulton Sheen. They don't sound like the sermons I was taught to preach, which are all, let me tell you a joke first, then tell you about my experience. They don't sound like that. They sound like intense explorations of the Bible. And I think that's what we need, So that's my little fervorino on the importance of study if you want to be successful over many, many years as a preacher, because it'll dry up fast if you stop praying and stop reading. And by the way, you can tell, can't you? When you hear a preacher and you think, boy, I wonder if this guy is praying or studying very much. So yeah, do it. Do both.
Hello, Bishop. I'm Jared from the Diocese of Kansas City. I'm in third theology. And I had a question about Sunday. So speaking of good habits and being thrilled by what we're learning about, what do you think the place of Sunday is, not just going to Mass, of course, but also celebrating it well? What do you think that has in terms of evangelization and our ministry? And then also, do you have any ideas of what that looks like?
When you say Sunday, you mean like to really live the Sabbath or the Lord's Day well? Is that what you're driving at?
Yeah, like leisure and prayer.
Well, I don't know if it bugs you. This happened to me now several years ago. My nephew, who's now finishing up college, but he was just a kid at the time, and he asked me to come to one of his basketball games. Well, I had Mass early, and then the game was like in late morning. So I went to this gym, and I watched the game, but afterwards he brought me up to the coach, to introduce me to the coach. So I greeted him, then I said, Coach, let me ask you though, why are you having these boys play on Sunday morning? This was like a Catholic, league. And he looked at me like I had two heads. And I said, they got 6 days of the week they can play. Why are they playing on? When I was a kid, no one did. We didn't play sports on Sunday morning because you assumed most people in the culture went to church. So I think that's indicative of a real problem, and the recovery of the Dies Domini. I take that very seriously. And precisely prayer, study, leisure, all these wonderful things that recreate the soul, recreation, right? I think it's a real problem that we've lost that. And I can witness, you guys are too young, but in the course of my lifetime, Sunday has totally changed. When I was a kid, Sunday did feel very different, and not just in the Catholic parish, all over the culture. Sunday was a different day. A gas station wasn't open on Sunday. You had to make sure that my father make sure we get gas on Saturday night because, of course, the station's closed on Sunday. Well, that's indicative of a real cultural conviction that Sunday's a different texture day. Stores were closed. You didn't go to the mall on Sunday. Things were closed. So that's a real problem, and I think we should be in the vanguard of trying to recover, at least, gosh, in our own spaces, in our own Catholic world, to recover the integrity of Sunday. I think that's very important.
Hello, Bishop Barron. My
Hi.
name is Jeff Benewald. I'm a second theology seminarian for the Archdiocese of St. Louis.
Okay.
My question is kind of going back to this tension between putting effort forth towards evangelization, much as We're on Fire does, but it seems that there's a tendency to focus so much on that we ignore providing for the people that are in the pews, that 20 or 40%. And so it seems that there's a tension there. You mentioned the charisms, to really emphasize facilitating the charisms of the people who are in the pews. So how would you navigate that balance?
Yeah, good. It's both and, obviously. And people have different interests and charisms. And so, we do both. I've just sort of intuited, for me, an important part of my ministry is reaching out. But the ultimate purpose of that is to bring them back. It's not just to leave them beguiled by a video on YouTube. The purpose is to bring them back to Mass, to bring them into the pews, absolutely. One thing I'd say, one way to bring them together is turn the people in the pews into missionaries. So I think we can settle for, they're coming to Mass, thank God, I'm all set with these folks. No, now you shape them to be missionaries. I don't know if you guys know the name Rick Warren, the big mega church Protestant pastor out here in California. And I've met him a couple times. And, he's famous for what's the book? The Purpose-Driven Life and all that. Well, anyway, we were talking and he said, what everyone knows about me is I wear the Hawaiian shirt and call me Rick and, very friendly and welcoming and all this. He said, well, yeah, that's to draw them in. So he wants to get people to come. But he said, once they're in and they've signed up, he said, then I put major league demands on them. First of all, discipleship. They have to be in programs of Bible study and, deepening their faith. And then finally, he said, mission. Every one of them has to go on mission of some kind. And if they don't, Rick Warren told me, if they don't, he said, they're out of the church. He doesn't let them come back. So that's a side of Rick Warren you don't see. But I wonder if we Catholics could use a little bit of that, namely to challenge the people who are coming to church. Yeah, that's great. Delighted you're coming to church. But now, go. The Mass has ended. Go. Glorifying the Lord by your life. Go out and be a missionary to this increasingly secular world. So that's where I'd bring them together, is take the people in the pews, but turn them into missionaries as well. So they're not complacent and you're not just doing it all on your own. But we're all sent on mission,
Bishop, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Hi.
Can I butt in?
Sure.
Deacon Mitchell Bear, Archdiocese of St. Louis. Just thinking about evangelization, it seems to me like almost as important as beauty is oneness and unity. And the importance, I guess, of presenting a united front as a church and as a presbyterate and as the leaders of our church. So can you speak on that and the importance of that for evangelization, especially in the midst of also like the corruption in our church, and how to maintain that unity and that united front?
Yeah, good. You're dead right in suggesting that the lack of unity is evangelically repulsive. When people look at Christians and say, well, look how divided you all are, how you're at each other's throats all the time, that's a complete turnoff, it seems to me, towards someone that wants to join the church. And so that we be united in our essentials, absolutely. And we are deeply disedifying in the measure that we are fighting with each other. And that's one of the shadow sides, as you know, of the social media, is when people go on social media and just see Catholics bickering hatefully with each other. I mean, that just turn the thing off. I mean, that's a counter sign of extraordinary power. So yeah, that lack of unity is super problematic. And who knew about it right away but St. Paul? I mean, read the Pauline epistles. Constantly, he's worried about divisions in the church. You know, I'm with Apollos, I'm with Christ, I'm with Paul. Has Christ been divided? You know, so Paul right away saw that problem. Well, it persists, and the social media has exacerbated it for sure. So I'm with you there. I mean, we just got to cut that out, that sort of bitter divisions within our own church. Now, having said that, yes, indeed, there's corruption in the church that has to be named and has to be brought out into the light. And if the church doesn't act, that becomes deeply disedifying to people. I know that from lots of experience, is when people see a church that is wrestling with corruption, but doing so inadequately, that turns them off and turns them away. So, but that's not being divisive. That's being clear, it seems to me, and following the impulse of the Spirit to bring to light corruption and try to solve it. That's why I wrote my little book, Letter to a Suffering Church, was trying to name that problem as clearly as possible. So, you know, that's some of the texture of that question. Absolutely, unity is evangelically necessary. So let's stop this crazy, hateful bickering with each other. At the same time, corruption unaddressed is deeply disedifying. So we have to do that, you know. Quick answer to a complex question you're raising there.
Bishop Barron, I'm Casimir Besheda from Oklahoma City.
Good, hi.
You said earlier how we need to bring the mystery of God to people, and one of the means intellectually. Well, I have a friend who is fairly knowledgeable about the Catholic faith and its teachings, but is about to leave the faith because of some mental gymnastics doing for one reason or another. So outside of praying for him daily, and really in general, for people who go through these mental gymnastics or think they know the true teaching of the church, how do you recommend handling that, especially in this apostolic age we're coming into?
So is it, so you mean someone in the Catholic framework who has raised intellectual objections, or someone who's left the church because of that? I mean, the bottom line is listen to them, find out what's bugging them, what's on their mind. Walk with them, use the road to Emmaus image, right? Hey, what are you talking about as you go? So find out what's bugging them, and then, gosh, engage it. That's why you're studying what you're studying, so you can respond to people's questions. If it is just mental gymnastics, I mean, show someone that. Like you're going through motions here that are unnecessary, or you're inventing problems that don't really exist. But I would, you know, listen to them. If someone's got an intellectual objection, take it seriously. And chances are they're repeating something that's been said by smart people over the centuries. Tell them that. I try that in my own dialogues on YouTube when someone, even like a really ferocious atheist, you know, comes on to say something like, yeah, you know, really smart people have held that position that you're holding. But now let me tell you why I think, you know, you need to balance it or something. But start with the positive, listen, look for the semina verbi, even in the most disagreeable interlocutor. But use our smart tradition. Please don't listen to people that say, oh, we accompany, we don't respond to questions. I mean, that's ridiculous, it seems to me. It's a goofy, false dichotomy. Anyone that accompanies young people know they're filled with questions. So if we don't have some intellectual firepower and able to answer them, then we're not going to accompany very well. So I guess I would listen, compliment what you can, assimilate what you can, resist what you must, and provide a compelling answer to them, you know? That's why you're in med school now. You know, you guys are like in theological medical school so that you can respond to the soul aches of your people.
Thank you.
Please.
Hi, Bishop Barron.
Hi.
My name is Ryan.
I'm from Springfield, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we form like most of our priests. So
Yeah.
So on the note of evangelization, and just kind of a quote that comes to my mind, I'm going to get it wrong, but the Pope kind of encourages us to move out out of the sacristies and into the public sphere. Is there a particular like charism or virtue that you see us needing to kind of embody in that? I think especially during the times where there's rifting between, racial issues or issues about like relativism and such come into people's lives. What's something that we can display that really draws them to Christ? Thank you.
Well, yeah, when you mentioned the virtues, what first came to my mind is courage. I think it's a time that calls for extraordinary courage. If we're going to go out into a culture that is, let's face it, not entirely, but to a large degree hostile to us, we who are making truth claims about a transcendent reality, we who are making truth claims about moral values, this is not a popular point of view today. And so to go out into that culture takes courage. I always go back to Paul Tillich, the Protestant theologian, who said the church should always meet the culture mit klingendem Spiel, was his German, with fife and drum. Well, see, fife and drum also gives the sense of a soldier going out with courage. So we go out with panache and with confidence, but also with courage to meet a culture that's going to be antipathetic to us. So I guess I'd mention cultivating that. But you go out with the apostolic spirit. We've all been sent, and you guys are preparing for an apostolic life. Your bishop's going to send you into some part of your diocese. So you're not there as a monk, you're there as an apostle sent out into the world. So courage and intelligence and panache and humor and confidence, you need all that, I think, as you go out. But you mentioned the Pope's thing about going out of the sacristies, and I wrote a little piece on that because I don't think he meant anything anti-liturgical. People construed him that way, but I just took it to mean what I said earlier, that we can't expect people to come to our churches, that we have to get out of our own sacristies out into the world. And, the adage now that mission country commences the moment you exit the church door, that's simply true. You don't have to cross the ocean to get to mission country. It's right outside the door of any church in America. So, go mit klingendem Spiel, go with fife and drum.
Hey, Bishop.
Hi.
Jim Mason, President Rector here, but don't let the men know because they're aware of that. I want to thank you for being with us first. So thank you for taking the time. But second, in your book, To Light a Fire on the Earth, you talk about small Word on Fire communities. And could you talk about this idea of these small communities, and are they being formed? Any update on that? And just kind of with the men in their priesthood, what that would look like.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for having me too. I appreciate it. Yeah, where am I right now? What room am I in at Kenrick? Where are you guys? Are you like in a auditorium or what is that?
They're in the auditorium.
Okay, good. It's so thanks for having me. I'm glad to be with you. Yeah, well, the Word on Fire has moved from being simply a ministry now to being a movement. And we have the Word on Fire Institute, which is based down in Dallas. And the Institute has now about 16,000 people in it. And this is lay people largely, who are being trained with specialized courses and programs to be evangelizers themselves. Now, currently, it's an online reality. So we have people from all over the world, and they take these courses together and they interact online. But the ultimate goal is to get these grounded in various places, first in our country and then I hope around the world. So there might be Word on Fire centers in various parts of the country. And the idea, again, is to draw largely lay people into the work of evangelizing the culture. I hope priests one day could play a role in then ministering to these Word on Fire centers around the world. So we're on the way, we're on the way. The Institute exists. I don't know if any of you belong to it, but we have a wonderful journal that comes out about 4 times a year, and then the courses and access to all the Word on Fire material. But it's meant to shape the laity to do this work, because we're the spiritual leaders of the community, but we can't do everything. I think we have to empower the laity to go forth. So that's what the Word on Fire movement and institute are about.
Thank you, Bishop. That's it. Thanks for your time. Any final words for the guys?
Well, God bless you guys. Hope you're coming back tonight, I hope. I think I'll be back in a few hours to deliver the lecture. I wish I could be there with you. The last time I was at Kenrick was not in Kenrick proper. It was near a hospital in St. Louis. Does that ring a bell to anybody? It was when Father John Horn was rector. And I gave a talk on Ash Wednesday. It was the beginning of the Lent season. And I think they were working on the main buildings of the seminary, and you were like in a different location. But I've never actually been, therefore, to Kenrick. And I was really, honestly, looking forward very much to the visit so I could see the place. So I regret I can't be with you, but, thanks for your dedication. Thanks for your willingness to serve the church. And maybe I'll just give you a blessing as I go. The Lord be with you. And may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit come down upon all of you and remain with you forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, I encourage you to share it and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel.